All right. So welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for the first session of the Fill Your Pantry Canning with Confidence webinar series on boiling water bath canners offered by University of Illinois Extension. Before we start, we ask that you please mute your microphone and make sure that your camera is turned off, just so that we have a strong bandwidth throughout the presentation. We welcome you to use the chat box throughout the webinar to ask questions, and at the end of the presentations, we will try to get through as many of the questions as we can before our time concludes. At the end of today's webinar, we will include a link to a short survey, and we greatly appreciate your participation and feedback. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the recording after the last webinar on July 22nd. This will be emailed to you, but please give us 1 to 2 weeks after this time to get this compiled and sent. Today's session will cover water bath canning, including how to safely use both an electric countertop and stovetop water bath canner. And you'll also get to watch a video demonstration showing the electric countertop canner in action. So we hope that by the end of the presentation, you'll be canning with confidence. For those that may not know, the University of Illinois Extension is the flagship outreach effort of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. We offer research-based educational programs to residents of Illinois in all 102 counties and beyond. I am your moderator, Kristen Bogdonis. I'm a nutrition and wellness team member serving Henry, Mercer, Rock Island, and Stark counties. And our presenter today is Susan Glassman. She is a University of Illinois Extension nutrition and wellness educator as well, serving Bureau, LaSalle, Marshall, and Putnam counties. Again, welcome everyone, and I will turn this over to you, Susan, to get us started.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome to everyone. We're glad that you're here and joining us, and 'tis the season, right? Food preservation and all of the different ways that we can preserve foods. So before we get started, I'm going to turn my camera off so you can enjoy the presentation. And again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. And here we go. So with talking about canning and food preservation, the main goal in food preservation is to increase the shelf life of food and keep it safe. And it helps us use what we have in the garden or what we purchase at local markets. And within that, it maintains nutrition and flavor, and it helps to slow down the rate of food spoilage. So it's a safe way to preserve quality foods at home through food preservation. And it allows us to enjoy homegrown food all year long. Also, it can help address dietary concerns. So if you need to cut back in sodium or just ensure a good supply of fresh produce for the year, food preservation is important. And then it can possibly save money. And so I wanted to ask everybody, how much do you think the average is that a family of 4 spends on groceries per week? Maybe a couple of you could put an idea in the chat box. But what do you think we spend as an average for a family of 4 on groceries per week? Okay, great. So yes, so you're close there. When we look at it, we're at right about $239 per week, which is on the low side, and then moderately about $361 per week. And that comes from the USDA reports going back into January of 22. Now that's gone up more, right? So we know that groceries are really expensive right now, and having food preservation and having a garden and using fresh produce and being able to enjoy it all year long is really important. And food preservation can be canning or freezing. You can dehydrate or dry your foods. You can ferment them and pickle. For some, food preservation is a hobby. It's also a great family activity, and it's also a tradition for some families to preserve foods together, especially corn and things like that. And for others, it's a form of good therapy. The one thing we want to emphasize is have good food safety. 70% of foodborne illness starts at home, and annually, 1 in 6 or 48 million Americans contract a foodborne illness. This equals 128,000 people being hospitalized and up to 3,000 deaths per year. And these are statistics from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Also, anyone is susceptible to food poisoning, but some people have a higher risk. And so we always say, envision who's sitting around the table and the different risks that people bring, and make sure that you're doing the best you can to serve food safely and prepare it safely. People who are at risk are adults who are age 65 and older, children who are younger than 5 years old, those who have weakened immune systems, pregnant women. And also, the one thing we know is that foodborne illness is common, it's costly, and it's preventable. But it costs about $15.6 billion a year to treat. And the best thing we can do is wash our hands. So when you're getting ready to do food preservation, make sure that you have your soap and you have some towels, and you're ready to wash your hands a lot. You can't wash your hands too much, right? So wet your hands with clean running water, apply the soap, lather, make sure you get the back of your hands and between your fingers, get under the fingernails, and have that soap on the skin for 20 to 30 seconds. Those are the rules we learn in elementary school and still use all the way through adulthood. Rinse your hands under clean running water and dry them using a clean towel or air dry. And looking at food preservation, when we look at what we need to do to have safe methods, it all comes down to the pH. There's high acid foods and there's low acid foods. And high acid foods are the ones that we're talking about today. Those are the foods that are processed through the water bath canners. Low acid foods we will be covering. We will be having another webinar for low acid foods on June 22nd. And those are foods that go into the pressure canner. So some of the foods that are high acid foods, cucumbers made into pickles, tomatoes and salsa, or tomatoes and peppers for salsa, apples and peaches and berries, fruits, and then we've got jams and jellies, and tomatoes. And remember, tomatoes, we can see they're in both high acid and low acid foods. They can be prepared with both methods, but they both have to have lemon juice added. Figs can be high acid and done in the water bath canner, but you always add lemon juice to those as well. We want to maintain a pH value of 4.6 or less. And so that helps to prevent any growth of any bacteria. And it maintains the pH so that those foods are shelf stable. Now, low acid foods are a lot of foods growing in the garden, right? Carrots and beets and potatoes, peas and corn and snap beans, pumpkin, which is cubed, can be canned. Again, here comes our tomatoes with added lemon juice, and meats and poultry and seafood. These are foods that have a pH value that is higher than 4.6. And so we're going to have to can them at a higher temperature because there is the risk of growing a bacteria called Clostridium botulinum or botulism here. And so we'll be covering these things, but today we're going to be talking mainly about high acid foods and water bath canning. And I mentioned the tomatoes, and just to kind of highlight quickly, canning tomato products. There are so many different tomatoes out. There are so many different varieties. I think there's over like 10,000 different varieties of tomatoes. but they fall on the border of the pH scale. And so we always add, and you would see that in our last slide with tomatoes, both high acid and low acid. You can can them in a water bath canner or pressure canner, but both always include adding acid to tomatoes. Do not can tomatoes after the frost. You can freeze them, but do not can them because the acid continues to change there. And we don't know how much we would need to add to can it safely. And talking about acids, acids include the following. There is bottled lemon juice. There's commercial brand citric acid, vitamin C tablets, ascorbic acid crystals, and there is vinegar that is 5% acidity, which would be on the label. And so these acids, remember on foods that microorganisms live and they multiply quickly on surfaces of fresh food. They also multiply on any food that has any bruises or damages in it. And microorganisms cause the spoilage in food. So by adding the acid, it helps to destroy microorganisms and enzymes, and it prevents the growth of bacteria and yeast and molds, and it also prevents discoloration of food. Remember to always follow the recipe, and with acid, never alter those acids in recipes. And looking at water bath canning. So this is the first of our webinar series. We're going to talk today about water bath canners. And again, they're for high acid foods. These water bath canners will process your foods at boiling point at 212 degrees to preserve that produce safely. Next week, we're going to talk about steam canning, which is again for high acid foods. And it's processed completely through high heat steaming. And then on June 22nd, we're going to talk about pressure canning. And here we see those low acid foods come into the picture. And here we're bringing the temperature above the boiling point to 240 degrees so that it can destroy any harmful bacteria like Clostridium botulinum or botulism. So we're going to feature the water bath canner today. And there's several different canners that we're going to talk about. And there on the top, you're going to see the electric water bath canner. And on the bottom is the stovetop water bath canner. In between the pictures are the jars that are loaded in the canner. Both canners hold the same amount. They can hold 7 quarts or 8 pints. They could hold 12 half pints. But what these canners do is they process at 212 degrees. The water is boiling and the water goes around the full jar, and it helps to remove the oxygen and create a seal, a vacuum seal. It brings it up to the temperature that destroys any of those bacteria we talked about, like yeast or molds. It destroys any enzymes. And these are the equipment that is recommended for safe food preservation. When we look at the stovetop canner, these are canners that are made of aluminum or porcelain covered steel. They will include a canner rack that can be lowered into the canner, and they have fitted lids. They can operate on both gas and electric stoves, and they're either flat bottomed or ridged bottoms. Now, normally the one in the picture, the porcelain covered steel, is a ridged bottom canner. They do make flat bottom canners, and those would be ones that you would see that are aluminum canner. So flat bottom or ridged canners, flat bottom is used on an electric stove, and they're for electric stoves. The ridged bottom can go on the gas stove, and for electric stoves, the canner should be no more then 4 inches wider in diameter than the element which it's heated on, so that it has good uniform processing. And the electric canner, you can see a picture here today. Again, same thing for high acid foods. This one is a little different. This one does not go on the stovetop, and it sits on the countertop. It can sit right on the side of your sink. And if you have a faucet that extends, you can actually put the jars right in the canner, and you can fill it with water and fill everything up about an inch above and turn the canner on. You would put it on medium, and it would then simmer, and those jars would be ready for canning. It also comes with a steamer rack, and you can see in the picture how it fits together. Those jars go in, and then the steamer, it's a diffuser rack goes on the top, and then the lid. And this steamer rack, when you put it on top of the jars, it holds everything in place, but it also maintains a better efficiency with temperature because that water boils evenly around all the jars. And some research has shown that these use less energy than stovetop canners. You can set your controls through the dial. So you can go to medium for simmering, and then you can set it at the canning function, and it'll bring it to a boil and hold it for the time that you're canning your food. There's a spigot, and this spigot allows for easy water drainage. And when you're canning, you can actually can your products. You can turn it off and unplug the canner, and you can let it sit for 5 minutes. And then after the water cools a little bit, you can just open the spigot and you can drain it right into the sink and then remove the jars. So it's very convenient. But this is one that I like because you're not carrying heavy pots of water and sliding things across the stoves. So it's a nice convenience to have on the countertop and sit close to the sink. When we look at the electric water bath canner, this is a newer appliance. And so it's a big canner. It holds just as much as the stovetop. We can see here's the parts diagram, and this comes from Kansas State Extension and University of Missouri Extension, and also it's the Ball Fresh Tech electric water bath canner. And you can see how it's all put together. It's 16 inches high when it's in full use, so it's a big piece of equipment. The glass top is tempered, but I like the glass top because you can look in and look at your food that's processing. And then that steamer rack helps, like I said, to secure the jars. But before you would put the jars in, you put in your canning rack, and that sits down at the bottom so everything can sit flat and that water can move around the jar and heat the full jar. The canner has the handles, and it has our spigot and your temperature control dial, and of course, easy drainage. And then the electric base, the canner sits into that base. But when you're not using the canner, that electric base fits inside the canner for storage. And then it comes with a power plug that you can put in and take out when you're using the canner. And so this canner is meant for countertops. Not a lot of heavy lifting is needed or taking water across the kitchen, and then easy drainage with the use of the spigot. Of course, you need all the equipment to go along with it. So you have your canners that you choose to use for your high acid foods. A scale is a good thing. Sometimes they'll tell you what you need in ounces, and so it's always good to weigh things. Your canner rack and your jar lifter, as well as a funnel, your kitchen tongs, and there's a jar wrench, a headspace measurer, and your lid lifters and bubble freer, a ladle, and a mixing spoon, a timer, and some paper towels. And most of the utensil type of things you can buy in a kit altogether. And you really only have to buy these things once. They last a long time. We don't use them every day through the year. It's a bit of an investment, but it's an investment that pays for itself over time. And looking at canning jars, there's lots of choices for canning, and you can choose regular or wide mouth mason style jars. There's a variety of sizes. You can get the half pint, the 1 cup. There's the pint jar, which is the 2 cups, or a quart holds 4 cups, and then even a half gallon, which is made specifically for high acid juice like apple or grape juice. But those fit in the water bath canners. Before you use your jars, you always want to wash them with warm soapy water and rinse them. And again, prepare the lids and rings by washing them in hot soapy water. But remember that rings no longer need to be boiled. This goes back about 10 years that companies changed the sealing compound in the lids. And so now you can just wash them. You can simmer them if you like, but you don't want to boil them because that would destroy that sealing compound. And they're ready to put right onto the jar and put your ring on to seal it. After you've processed your foods and they've sealed and you're ready to open up the jar, you can use the canning caps, which are the white caps in the picture here, to store your food in the refrigerator after you open it. And then with cleaning water bath canners, they can get pretty full of, calcium and lime, and they could start to look pretty like they need a good clean. And so after you're done with your canning, you can use a soft washcloth and hot soapy water and really clean that interior and the sidewalls of your canners. If there are dark spots or calcification spots, you can use a tablespoon of vinegar to a quart of water, and then you're going to bring that up to a boil, and that should pull some of that away. And then again, wash with hot soapy water and rinse and air dry. Now, a helpful hint is adding about a 1/4 cup of white vinegar to the water to help prevent buildup from hard water sources. So now we're getting to the food preservation, where there are 4 P's: plan, prepare, process, and then put it up. So when we look at planning, of course, we want to keep our food safe. We want our jars to be washed and ready, but we also want our workspace to be clean. And so we want our workspace sanitized. And to sanitize your workspace, you need to remove all of anything that's dirt or any debris, and then wipe it off with a bleach solution. It can be a bleach wipe or a solution that you make, and you can let it air dry or use a paper towel to dry it. Bleach solution is easy to make at home. 1 teaspoon of bleach to 1 quart of water. And then also decide what you're going to preserve. So what's in season, like strawberries are coming up right now here in Illinois. And when you're planning, set some time aside. We're all really busy. So set the time in your schedule that you're going to use for food preservation, and then use a tested recipe. Here we have So Easy to Preserve, which is the book we use here at Illinois Extension, and that comes from the National Center of Home Food Preservation from University of Georgia. And then preparing. So well-preserved food begins with a seed in the field, in the garden, or the orchard. And you want to harvest at the peak of freshness. You want ripe, really nice produce that's unblemished and unbruised. And you're taking it out of the garden. Brush off the soil and keep it cool until it's ready. Now, when you brush off the soil, remember that botulism is a natural spore in soil, but botulism only grows in the absence of oxygen after it's been canned in an anaerobic environment. Those spores are harmless on fresh foods. So just a good wash of the produce with clean water just before using is fine. And then once you cut your produce, if you're not using it right away, make sure you refrigerate it until you're ready to use that. And processing. So here's where you've invested a lot of time. You've grown the produce in the garden, or you've gone to the market. You have all your equipment, you've set your time aside. So please follow directions and recipes and follow those safety guidelines for the quality you need. You don't want to get all the way to the end with that question, right? So following those directions is going to take you from start to finish and using a tested recipe, like from So Easy to Preserve. And when we look at processing here, you're going to remove your jar. So you can see in the picture, they're taking that one jar out from the canner. And remember that jars have to preheat in a canner. We talked about simmering them, but for at least 10 minutes. And then you remove one and you fill it. If something is processed less than 10 minutes, then you have to boil those jars for 10 minutes. And your recipe will guide you with the proper way to sterilize jars if needed. Then you're going to fill your jars, and you can see in the picture that we have the funnel, and you're going to ladle in your food. And you want to make sure to measure your headspace. And this is the fun part. This is the part, if it's a family activity, everyone's going to love this, because you're going to measure the space between the lid and your food. And this is the space that is needed and is in the recipe for you to have a successful seal and to be able to have the food preserved safely. So make sure you follow it. If too little headspace is present, that food is going to bubble out and it's not going to seal. And if too much headspace is present, it's not going to seal, or it may seal and really discolor. So you want to make sure you get the headspace. That's really important. Look at your recipe, and then you can measure with your headspace tool. And after you have your headspace measured, then you're going to wipe the rims, and you're going to use your bubble freer. And if you don't have a bubble freer, you can use a plastic knife, but never metal in the jars, because that could cause breakage. Secure the lid and the ring. So you're going to place your lid on the jar, and then you're going to put the ring on, and you're going to screw it just until it stops and give it one more quarter of a turn. This is a fun part, and we call it one tug snug. It's not too tight. It's not too loose. It's just that 1/4 tug that allows the jar to expel the oxygen during the canning process so that it can seal. So you don't want it super tight because the oxygen can't expel, and you don't want it super loose because it won't be able to seal. And then you're going to use your recipe with the correct elevation or altitude for processing at the correct time. And it's all about time and temperature. When those jars go into the canner, and you can see they're adding the last jar, you're going to bring that water up to a rapid boil, and you're going to cover it, and you're going to let it boil for the time it says. And so you follow your altitude. If you don't know the altitude, you can look up the elevations on Google Maps, and you can get that right online. And after you've processed your jars, you're going to take them out of the canner, and they're going to sit on the counter between 12 and 24 hours. You may hear a pop very quickly when they come out and they're starting to cool. And we love to hear that sound, that pop. That's the best sound of all, because you know that it's all worked the way it should. But after 12 to 24 hours, you're going to not disturb those jars, and you're going to check for the seals. You're going to press in the center of the lid with your finger or your thumb, and it should not pop up and down. It should be concave. And so if it does, if it's not sealed, you can reprocess within 24 hours. If longer, you can refrigerate and use in 2 to 3 days, or you can freeze your food. For sealed jars, you're going to take the rings off. They no longer need the ring, and the ring can get rusty if you leave it and it's wet with water. You're going to wash off your jars and label them, and then you want to store them and use them. We say by the next season or by 1 year for the best quality. Okay, so now we're going to look at the electric water bath canner in action, and we made some apple pie filling. We're going to give you a video. Everybody ready? Okay, here we go. So this is our apple pie filling video using the electric water bath canner. Today it's apples for pie filling with our water bath canner. You will need a water bath canner. This includes either a stovetop water bath canner or the electric canner. The electric water bath canner sits on the countertop, and it's easy to fill with a kitchen faucet. It holds up to 7 quarts or 8-pint jars. At one time. The drain spout lets you drain your water directly into the kitchen sink so you aren't lifting anything heavy. There is a rack that fits on the bottom and a steaming and diffuser rack that fits on top of the jars to keep them in place. The canner has a max line for filling and a glass top. You'll need the following: a stock pot, 1 large bowl, a strainer, measuring cups and spoons, a paring knife, a whisk, a rubber spatula or scraper, quart-sized canning jars with lids and rings, a ladle, a funnel, bubble freer, a headspace measurer, and a jar lifter. For the apple pie filling, you will need 3.5 cups of blanched sliced fresh apples, 3/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons granulated sugar, 1/4 cup clear gel, 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon nutmeg, 3/4 cup apple juice, 1/2 cup water, and 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice. While the water is heating, wash your hands and your produce. We have peeled and cored and sliced our apples into 1/2 inch pieces. You can use a paring knife or an apple peeler and corer for larger amounts. You're going to need between 5 and 8 large apples for 1 quart of pie filling. Submerge your apples after they're sliced in an anti-browning solution. Then you're going to strain the apples. You're going to blanch the apples in a stock pot. You can blanch 6 to 7 cups at a time in 1 gallon of boiling water. Our recipe is going to use 3.5 cups of blanched apples. Boil each batch 1 minute after the water returns to a boil. Drain and keep the heated fruit in a covered bowl or a pot until they're ready to add to the pie filling. Now we're ready to make the pie filling. You're going to start by adding your water and apple juice to the stock pot. Combine the granulated sugar, clear gel, cinnamon, and nutmeg to the stock pot with the water and the apple juice. Make sure to stir and cook this on medium-high heat until it thickens and begins to bubble. Add the lemon juice and stir it till it boils about 1 minute. Next, fold in your blanched apples, and then you're going to fill the jars with this hot mixture. To do that, you'll want to remove the jar from your canner with your jar lifter. Be very careful, they're very hot, and remember that hot liquid goes into hot jars. You're going to use your funnel and ladle and your bubble freer. You're going to want to fill the jar and remove any bubbles. Use the headspace tool to measure and leave a generous 1-inch headspace. Wipe the rims with vinegar. Use a clean wipe each time to remove any pie filling. Remember, these jars are very hot. Place the lid and then the ring on the jar and give it a 1 tug snug. Place the jars in the canner and make sure the jars are covered with 1 to 2 inches of water. Bring the canner to a full boil. You're going to process the pie filling for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes of processing, turn off the canner and wait 5 minutes to remove the jars. Use the jar lifter to remove the jars and place them on a towel and leave space between the jars. Let them sit undisturbed to cool for 12 to 24 hours, and then you're going to label your jars and put them up to enjoy. Okay, get that going. All right, so everybody saw the electric water bath canner and the apple pie filling. And with the apple pie filling, you might want to do a test quart first. It took a couple times, and so the one thing to share with everyone is make sure that you have the equal distribution of apples to pie filling in each jar. Clear gel will thicken after processing, and so sometimes people's jars won't seal. With the headspace, be a little generous in that inch of headspace, and that's just from the clear gel product. And so it's thin while it's processing, but it thickens as it cools, and that means it's going to expand a little bit in the jar. And we want to make sure that it has a good seal. With the apple pie filling, the apple pies are delicious, right? But also think of some other ways that you can use this product, maybe on some baked brie cheese or yogurt parfait or oatmeal. And you can again, 7 quarts of pie filling in a water bath canner. So that's what we have for today. I would like to share resources with you. You can look at a lot of canning videos that we have on YouTube, What's Cooking with Mary Liz Wright, and at University of Illinois Extension on our website. You would look up extension.illinois.edu food and food preservation for all of our resources, and then Facebook Around the Table, and of course the National Center for Home Food Preservation. But I want to thank you for watching, and now I'm going to turn it back to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really liked that video. It really helped tie everything together that you talked about as we head into camp season. Before we get to questions, though, I want to pop a survey link into the chat box. And this is, I can grab it here. Just give me 1 second. There we go. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes to fill this out, that would be greatly appreciated. And you can also scan the QR code that is on your screen. It'll take you to the same survey. And I did see some questions come in, Susan, so I will go over those now for you. The first question is, do home canned foods last more than 1 year if properly sealed?
They can last. We recommend you use them in the season, and they will change a little bit in quality as they go, but it's best to try and use what is canned from the 1 year canning season.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you respond when people ask if they should turn their jars upside down?
So that's always a question we get. And those are some of the old ways of canning. And really, you don't need to anymore. If you're putting it through the water bath canner and you're processing it, remember we said there's time and temperature. And those are the 2 things that are needed so that those jars are heated to destroy any of those enzymes and bacteria and molds and successfully seal. And so as long as you're following those canning directions, you shouldn't need to do anything else like that.
Okay. The next question we have is, will we have access to this video and slides after the webinar? And did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, Kristen, we're working on that, and I believe we will. So I know people always like to see the slides, and then the recording will also be coming out for everybody too. So.
Okay, and I'm going to put that survey link in the chat box again because I don't think it went in correctly the first time. So here it is again in the chat. There we go, that's better. Okay, the next question is, does the processing time start from the time the jars are lowered into the canner or from the time the water begins to boil?
From the time the water begins to boil. That's when you set your time at. So it might take a little time to bring it up to that. You want it to be at a rapid rolling boil, and that's when you'll set your timer to go.
Oh, thank you. Next question, when canning multiple batches, should the canning water be dumped and refreshed? Or can it be just supplemented with additional water to ensure coverage?
It can be used unless there is any leakage from jars, then you would want to change the water.
Next question, any tips for canning pickles and keeping them crisp and crunchy?
That's one we get a lot, and there are some products that you can use for pickling, but I don't know if I've ever had pickles turn out crispy and crunchy as the commercial brand, but they're just as delicious
I've had good success with freezer pickles.
with freezer. Yeah.
I really like making those. They usually tend to be pretty crunchy. Next question is, I don't think I heard it properly, but do you put hot water in the mason jars to keep them hot while the water bath is preparing? So you don't just put hot tomato sauce, for example, in just room temp jars.
Yes. Always hot liquid goes in hot jars. So when you're getting ready with cutting up all of your produce, then you're going to hold the jars in your canner at a simmer. And you want to have them at a simmer for at least 10 minutes.
Thank you. A lot of good questions coming in today.
Yeah, lots of questions.
The next one we have is, can you tell us about indicators of when the canning was not successful?
Yeah, well, first, if it doesn't seal, or sometimes there could be discoloration. And so those are two of the big indicators. You might have jars that have leakage. They might feel sticky, so that they leaked during processing.
Mhm. I've recently got a question about lids buckling too. So after someone canned, their lids were buckled. So that's an indicator that you put your lid on too tight.
Yes, and it didn't allow it to expel all of the oxygen through the canning process. Yes.
All right, next question. Do tomatoes get watery when canning? I've seen jarred tomato sauce look watery on the top.
It is a high water vegetable or fruit. But once you stir it up and mix it up, it'll be fine. So
Next question. I have really hard water. What can I do to help remove the film I get left on all of my glasses?
yeah, so you can add a quarter of a cup of vinegar per quart of canning water. And that seems to help a little bit with the hard water. And then after you're done and your jars are sealed, you can wash those jars off in the sink so that they look nice to put on the shelf.
Next question. I thought I had heard that electric canners were not recommended. Is that just for low acid foods?
So yeah, so that's a really good question. And I'm glad somebody asked that because the electric water bath canner, which is the Ball Fresh Tech canner, is the only one at this time that has been approved for high acid foods. And so this one, they've done testing and there's literature from Kansas State Extension and Missouri Extension, which gives us the research that we need to know that it's going to process it at the proper temperature and time that you would get as the same on the stovetop. But there are a lot of canners that, or cookers, that are not currently approved, and there's not the research on them. So it's always good to check. And if you have a question about something before you buy it, you can call your local extension office and they can look it up for you.
Absolutely. Next question is from someone in Southern California who does not have a basement. They want to know if storing their jars in a garage is okay.
It's a cool, dark environment. So you don't want it above 70. And so a graduate fit, now I don't store my jars in the basement. I'll store them in my pantry in my laundry room, and that seems to work fine. So you just don't want them to be somewhere where it's really hot and there's a lot of sunlight. If you have a lot of windows or something in the kitchen, and a difference in temperature. So
Absolutely. Next question is, if you didn't properly dry the mason jar tops and rings, do I need to buy a new batch? How often do you change the rings?
So that's a really good question. Always look at your seal and, push down. And if it's sealed, it's fine. And the rings, you can reuse your rings. There's research that says if you don't use the rings for the current batch that you're processing, then make sure they're well dried because those rings can get rusty. And if they are rusty, then I would get new rings to use.
And what about the lids there?
If the jar was not dried off, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think they might have been wanting to know if they need to get new lids or if they didn't use them all or.
Oh, if you still had lids that you didn't use, you can dry them off. You can dry them off and use them again, as long as they weren't put through the processing through the canners.
Okay. Next question, do you ever use the jars hot right out of the dishwasher?
You can. That's a really good question. You can process and wash those jars and hold them warm in the dishwasher to fill them. Now, you cannot can in the dishwasher, but you can hold your jars warm in the dishwasher.
All right. Next question. What's the difference between a Presto canner and a water bath? Can you use a crock pot for canning or water bath? So 2 questions there.
Yeah, so the crock pot I would not use for canning. And remember that we recommend the canning equipment that we have the research on, right? And so we know that you're going to get to the proper temperature at the time needed to safely kill any bacteria or molds or yeast or microorganisms and to seal the jars. So I don't think a crock pot's going to do that. And the Presto canner, I'm not sure if they're talking about the new one that's came out. There is a new Presto canner, but I don't have a lot of information on that one right now. But there is the Presto pressure canner, and that will be coming up on June 22nd. We'll be covering the pressure canners.
All right. A few more questions, I think. When ladling hot cranberry sauce into hot jars prior to canning, I've had them pop the seal. Are they still safe?
Okay, before they're processed, I'm thinking a lot of times like a sauce or a jam is very hot, like you heat it to a boil. And so it may feel like the jars seal. They're safe to process, but they still need to be processed through the canner. I hope I answered that correctly.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Let's see. The next question is refrigerator storing okay in hotter climates? I
Oh,
think they mean about
yeah.
the processed jars.
Yeah. Sometimes people do store them in the refrigerator. It's fine. I mean, they're shelf stable, but they need to be in a cool environment. So
Better cooler than too hot, probably.
yeah, I mean, I've had things that I've canned that I've kept in the refrigerator, like salsas and things as well. So
Next question is, can you take the rings off after processing them and you are ready to store?
yes. So when you're done and your jars have sealed, then you're going to remove the rings and you're going to gently wash off your jars to pull any of the hard water stains off. You're going to label them and then you're going to put them up. Yep.
All right, fantastic. Next question, are lids that are made overseas and not by Ball safe? So maybe other brands other than Ball.
Yeah. We really recommend the lids that go along with the mason jars.
The 2-piece, yes.
Yeah.
Not the 1-piece.
Yes, that's correct.
And I think this is our last question.
Okay. Lots of,
Yeah, so many good questions today. So the last question is, so the lid has to pop for it to be done correctly, correct?
yes. So the lid, when it seals, you'll hear the pop. And next week, when Kristen um, talks about steam canning, she's going to show how the jars seal. And we love to hear the pop. And you should hear a little pop. Sometimes it's not that loud, but there's always going to be an where the oxygen is expelled and the lid pulls down concave. And that's what we want to see. That's how we know the lid is sealed. So if you don't hear the pop and it's sealed, it's okay.
All right, I think that's all for questions. So thank you everyone who put something in the chat box. I hope we got to them all. And then the last piece of info I have for you is a registration link. So if you were not able to register for next week or the following week's webinars, I'll put that registration link in the chat, or you can share it with anyone if you'd like. And we hope to see you at the second webinar, June 15th at noon, which is all about using the steam canner, which is a safe alternative to the boiling water bath canner. So we hope to see you there.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you all next week.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.